Welcome you and all to another episode of the Global Latin Factor podcast, where we talk about Latino everything. I am your host, Crispin Valentin. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. Before we get to the story, to the Global Latin Factor podcast, if you already subscribed, thank you so much, because you are helping us a lot and we got a lot of stories for you. You have nothing to lose and so much to gain when you subscribe. All these amazing stories that we have on the Global Latin Factor podcast. So you already know what to do. It's free. Take care of us. We'll take care of you. And now let's get to the story. Drum roll. Today we are talking about the sweet potato. When you think about sweet potato, many people will be like, sweet potato? Not a lot of people know the history about it or how deep it is. But once you follow the history, this goes much further and more than people expect. It takes us into the ancient Americas, into indigenous agriculture, and into Caribbean language, into Latin America food history, into global trade, and even into the most interesting question in Pacific history. So let's get into it. If you saw a sweet potato sitting in the market today, you probably would be like thinking about not much, or thinking about maybe has such a great history as far as a traveling crop goes, but it does. This is exactly what it is. And first thing that we need to clear up about the sweet potato is very simple. The sweet potato is not the same thing as a regular potato. People group them together all the time, but they are completely different plants. The regular potato belongs to the nightshade family. The sweet potato belongs to the morning glory family. Its scientific name is Ipomae batatas. You do not need to memorize that, by the way. It's just giving you a little bit of what it goes. The sweet potato has its own history, not like the regular potato. This is not a regular potato story at all. Another color. This is a separate crop in its own and has its own path in history. Now, the name already starts telling you parts of the story. In Spanish, the most formal and widely recognized word is batata. The word is tied to the Caribbeans and is believed to come from Antillean or probably Taino sources. And that matters because before archaeology entered the conversation, the language already tells you this crop is sitting inside indigenous Caribbean history. Depending on where you are, where you're in Spanish and in the Spanish world, you may also hear Camote, you might hear Boniato, and parts of Spain you might hear Moniato. So right there, the name already tells us the crop moved through different regions and stayed there long enough to settle into everyday language. That is one of the things food history does really well. It keeps a record of ordinary speech, sometimes of people that forget the origin of the food, but the name still carries a piece of the past. Let's go to the origin. The sweet potato is a native to the Americas. This is the foundation. That part is very strong. The Americas, an entire continent, not the US. When scholars get more specific, they separate a few questions. They look at the actual broader ancestry of the plant. They look at the domestication. They also look where cultivating lines become established and important. Now, those are related, but not exactly the same thing. The clearest broad summary is this. The sweet potato's deeper history is tied to the American tropics and subtropics, especially in Central America, Northern South America, and Peru Ecuador region. And Peru is where the story starts getting specifically deep because archaeologists have found evidence tied to the sweet potato. Peru is goes all the way back, going back for over thousands of years. Some reports remain and have a date over 8,000 years BC. Now, that date needs to be handled carefully. Very early remains do not automatically prove a fully developed domesticated farming in that sense necessarily. The evidence might reflect early usage, early management, or early domestication process still unfolding over time. So, the careful version and the factual version is this. There is there's very ancient evidence tied to the sweet potato in Peru and is tied to the year 2000 BC. There's strong evidence for domestication of sweet potatoes in South America. That is already a major historical fact because it means that the sweet potato has parts of its life in Americas way before the European colony. Before Europe wrote about it, before Europe transported it, and before Europe inserted itself into the movement of crops across the ocean. That part matters. That part matters a lot because, and on a podcast like this, it matters because of the things that we discuss. Again, the global Latin factor and the roots where it began. The roots are indigenous. The first chapter of this amazing story belongs to the indigenous people of the Americas. This is where the human relationship with crop and later the story continues through the Caribbean, through Latin America, through the wider Hispanic world, and that is what makes this true a global Latin factor. The sweet potato did not become important when Europeans found it, not at all. It was already ancient in the Americas. Let's pause for a second. What that tells us is bigger than the crop itself. It tells us people in the Americas were developing agriculture systems, selecting plants, managing land, and sustaining communities over long periods of time. They were not waiting for the outside world to define value to them. They already had food knowledge and they already had cultivation systems, and the sweet potato is one of the pieces of the larger record. That is a part of why this crop lasted and is used and adapted as well in warm climate and produce food reliably, and adaptable crop leaves deep marks in history. People keep them, people grow them again and again. People pass them down. People before Europe even removed sweet potatoes outwards, it was already had a life of its own in the Americas. It was already cultivated, it was already eaten, already part of local agriculture systems. So when Europeans encounter it, they were already just staring into history. They were not making history because it was already there. They were stepping into one that was already on their way. Distinction matters because Europeans helped spread the sweet potato further into Europe. They did not begin the sweet potato history. That story began in the Americas, and that is already exactly why the sweet potato belongs in a larger conversation about Latino contribution, American contribution, America's contribution, the continent, and indigenous contribution, because the wider world received this crop from this hemisphere. Now, the next chapter of this great story is where things start stretching outward after the Columbian exchange Spanish and Portuguese. Maritime networks played a major role in spreading the sweet potato more widely. The crop reached Europe in the late 16th century. From there, it moved into regions. Some scholars describe two broad routes. One is the Batata line. That route is tied more closely to the Atlantic and Portuguese movement into Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and East Indies. The other is the Camote line, or Camote, whichever you like to say it. That route is tied more closely to the Spanish Pacific route, specifically the movement from Mexico to the Philippines. And that's what makes that so good, that name themselves preserve the route. Batata tracks one of the path, Camote tracks another one. So the language is doing historical work here. The word is not only the word is carrying movement, the word is carrying geography, and the word is carrying an empire. That is part of what makes a food history so rich. Sometimes the name of the food is carrying the map. Patatas, camote are not just words, they are preserved in the routes. Now, here's where the sweet potato story becomes more interesting because one of the most important chapters does not happen in Europe. No, even though there's routes all over. It happens in Polynesia. There is a strong evidence that sweet potatoes reached part of the Polynesian by around 12,000 to 13,000 AD. That is before regular European contact. And one you hear, and once you hear that, it's obvious that it follows. How did the crop from the Americas get to the Polynesian islands so early? That question has mattered to historians, archaeologists, and crop scholars for a long time. Now, scholars still debate that exact mechanism. They debate the route, they debate the direction of contracts, they debate who moved it and how. But the larger point is still strong. The sweet potato in Polynesia is one of the most clearest piece of evidence for some kind of pre-European trans-Pacific contact. That is huge because older history narrates often made it sound like Europe was the force that connected everybody. The sweet potato complicates that picture. It tells us ancient people were moving, navigating, and exchanging more than those old narrative admissions. So, again, crazy how one thing that we taught in the book now is reflecting something else. And that is why this crop matters beyond food. It becomes evidence in much more and bigger human history. When sweet potato shows up in Polynesia before regular Europe contact, that is not just food trivia, that is a clue about human movement across the Pacific. Now, once Europe entered the story, the sweet potato begins another phase of its journey after the wider spread through Spain and Portugal routes. The crop takes hold of multiple parts in the world. In Asia, sweet potato becomes a major crop, and Asia remains one of the largest producing regions in the world. In Africa, especially in parts of sub Saharan Africa, it becomes an important food crop in local systems. In Europe, it arrives later through post 1492 circulation and Oceania, especially Polynesian. It carries the earlier significance tied to pre European contact. So, in practical terms, sweet potato reach every inhabited continent: North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Oceania, not Antarctica or the normal agriculture, not in Antarctica, the normal agriculture sense. And today it's grown more than in 100 countries. That is not a small reach at all, by far. That is a global reach. Sweet potato started in the Americas, reached every inhabited country in the world in history, and now let's keep it honest. Let's keep it honest about regards to the reach of the historic Latin culture roots that distributed food. There are still debates in scholarships. Scholars still debate the exact center of domestication. They still debate how to interpret the earliest archaeological remains and still debate the practice and still debate the precise mechanism by which sweet potato first reached Polynesia. Those are real scholarly questions, but those debates do not erase the larger structure of the story of the sweet potato. And the larger structure is clear. The sweet potato is an America, the continent of American crop, and it has ancient evidence in Peru. It cultivated long before the European colonization, and not only that, but it was in Polynesian before regular European contact and later spread throughout the entire world, widely through Spain and Portugal trade routes. That framework still holds, and again, it's been the global land factor food contribution that we talk about. Now here's where it becomes the global land factor, because when people talk about food that change the world, they usually focus on the final cuisine and forget about the origin. They remember the plates, they forget about the path. The food from the Americas gets hit with all that all the time. For example, tomatoes, cacao, peppers, potatoes, vanilla, maize or corn, and of course, sweet potato. Think about the post Instagram picture lovely, but they don't see the history of what happened prior. People use them, people build them, people build entire cuisines around them, people depend on them, people actually save them from famine. But America as a continent is the origin of its entirety history. And once again, it is the origin that does not fade, and it credit with credit's due, it needs to happen because that's what the history is. That is why this story matters, because the sweet potato is one of the more reminders that the Americas, the continent of America, is sitting where not on the sidelines as far as the world history goes. They were already helping feed the world at that time. And if we are accurate, the first chapter of that contribution belongs to the indigenous people of the Americas, the continent of America, not the US. Then the story continues to the Caribbean, through Latin America, through Spanish speaking cultures, and through the broader Latino historical world. Now, before I close out here, real quickly, I'm going to give you 3 fun facts that you might have not known about sweet potato. The first one: sweet potatoes leaves are edible, and in some places, leaves are cooked as greens. Number 2, sweet potatoes are not only orange, they also can be white, yellow, red, or purple. Did you know that? Let me know in the comments. Number 3, in the United States, many foods sold as yams are actually sweet potatoes. True yams are a different plant. Did you know that? And honestly, that is just one of the things that tells you so much about the history, how it can be confused independent. And again, the sweet potatoes being a world traveler before world traveling was a thing. Can you imagine that? So the next time you see a sweet potato, here's what you need to know and look into. It's an ancient crop from the Americas, a record of indigenous agriculture knowledge, a Caribbean name that survived, a food that crossed the ocean Once again, a word travel before that happened. A crop that helped scholars think about the Pacific contrast and a contribution from the hemisphere, the American hemisphere, that reach across the inhabited world. And not only that, that is the story of the sweet potato. And again, that is also the global Latin factor, a global Latin factor contribution. Once again, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the Global Latin Factor podcast. I am your host, Crispin Valentin. Make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. Why? You have nothing to lose and so many amazing stories to gain. Learn today, get inspired today. Visit our website, thegloballatinfactor.com, or visit our Instagram social media and get inspired. If you're in a rut, you don't know what to do, guess what? You have amazing representation of amazing Latinos doing amazing things, and you'll find it all in our channel at the Global Latin Factor Podcast. And remember, we are just like you. We are people. We are humans. We are the spice and flavor in this melting pot that it is the world. Till next time.